What is up, guys? So this is going to be my review for Arrow Season 6, Episode 13, titled The Devil's Greatest Trick. So, just like Supergirl this week, this felt like a secondary mid-season finale, and I think it should have been the mid-season finale. It could have erased 4 episodes from the first 9 episodes of the season and have this episode be the actual season finale. It probably would have worked better. But it felt like a secondary mid-season finale, as in it was like Hidden James. This is a spoiler. Caden James was killed by Ricardo Diaz at the end, making him the main villain of the season. Even though Caden James was the main villain for longer, Ricardo Diaz was behind everything from the start, so he is technically the main villain. And this is what we were promised from the start. From before Season 6 started, we were promised Ricardo Diaz as the main villain of the season, and it was so confusing. After 13 episodes, he wasn't. It was Caden James. But finally, we have the main villain we deserve. Not to say Caden James was terrible or anything, he wasn't the best villain, but in the last 2 episodes, in this episode and in the previous episode, he was honestly pretty good. In the last episode, he was pretty threatening when around Vigilante. When Vigilante was undercover, he was pretty threatening, and in this episode, he was also pretty threatening, and at the same time, he was a good villain in this episode. He was like, his motivation was more fleshed out with the flashbacks, which I thought the flashbacks were pretty good, honestly, even though they probably should have happened earlier in the season, because the episode that he dies is the episode where we learn his motivation, or his motivation is more fleshed out. This should have happened earlier in the season. I think that this should have been way earlier in the season, and then the flashback should have been way earlier in the season, and even this episode should have been earlier in the season, like in episode 9, because at this point, Caden James was the main villain for longer than Ricardo Diaz, which is a little weird. But I thought that in this episode, specifically, Caden James was pretty good. But at the same time, I'm very glad Ricardo Diaz finally took over as the main villain, because that's who we were promised. We were promised that he will be the main villain of the season, and we have not gotten that until now. And also, Caden James is a hacker, Ricardo Diaz is a fighter, even though he lost a fight to Wild Dog and Mr. Terrific, which I think is a little absurd. But I also think that he faked losing, because there's no, if he did lose a fight to Wild Dog and Mr. Terrific, then he's not really a threat in the slightest. But I think that he lost on purpose, because Ricardo Diaz, or Richard Dragon, is supposed to be one of the best fighters in the whole DC universe. So there's no way he would lose a fight to Wild Dog and Mr. Terrific. So I think he definitely either faked it, or they're changing it up a bit and making him less of a fighter and more of a guy with an organization, which I think is a little lame. They should definitely make him a fighter, and at the same time, he has an organization, and also might even be working with the Broad Finance, hopefully. But I definitely think that Ricardo Diaz taking over as the main villain is a good thing, and it might course correct the rest of the season, because the conflict with Caden James was really boring, and it wasn't good in the slightest. Even though he was pretty good in the last 2 episodes before that, he wasn't. So I'm glad that that is finally over, and you could say that Ricardo Diaz will only have 10 episodes to flesh out himself, but in the last season we only had like 8 episodes of Prometheus being fleshed out with the mask off. Even though he had the mask on for 15 episodes, I think it was 15 episodes or 16, but even though he was the same character, him with the mask off, the actor, was only fleshed out for 8 episodes. Which I think we were robbed of that a little bit, because he was such a great actor that I feel like it would have been better if we had him for longer. But at the same time, I think they did it really well in that season, so they can do it really well in this season as well, with this time with 10 episodes to flesh him out. Although a few complaints I have about the reveal is that Ricardo Diaz himself was not fleshed out at all this season. I feel like they could have avoided the problem of him having only 10 episodes to be fleshed out in the season by just fleshing him out in the first 13 episodes, because we saw him like 4 times this season so far. The first episode we saw him in was the only episode that he had really any screen time, and even in that episode he wasn't that great. So the fact that he wasn't fleshed out in any episode, and then here he's taking over, I don't even know if he's going to be a great main villain, but he probably will be better than Caden James. But they could have given us a little bit of they could have fleshed him out a little bit this season at all before this, so that once he does become the main villain, I can be confident that he's going to be a good one. Another thing is that I think they should have revealed that he was behind everything earlier in this episode, because once it was revealed that there was a mastermind behind everything, it was pretty clear that it was going to be Ricardo Diaz, because we were promised he was going to be the main villain. So there was no point dancing around that, having the villains escape again, and I'm fine with Team Arrow not knowing, but the audience not knowing till the end of the episode was a little frustrating to me, because it was pretty obvious that it was him. First of all, Anatoly blatantly said it wasn't me, and although it was kind of a shock to hear Black Siren say I did it, and I still had my doubts about that, and I expected it to be fake. So there really was no point of hiding the fact that Ricardo Diaz was behind everything, because it was so clear. We were promised it was him, and Anatoly straight up said that it wasn't him, and I really believed him when he did. He was like, I told you I didn't do it. So it was pretty clear that it was Ricardo Diaz, but those are the only really they're not minor complaints. The first one is major, the second one is minor, but those are the only complaints I have about the reveal that Ricardo Diaz is behind everything. But Ricardo Diaz taking over as the main villain of the season and killing Caden James, which, by the way, was a really intense, great scene, I felt, and it probably, spoiler alert, will be number 1 on my top 10 Arrowverse moments of the week this week. So that's a big spoiler, and I'm saying probably because I'm not 100% sure about that. But that was a great intense scene, but everything before that, the whole episode, was also really good. It might be one of my favorite episodes of the season. Like I said, it felt like a mid-season finale because of the thing that happened at the end with Ricardo Diaz taking over. So since it's a season finale, it's got to be a good episode. Yeah, I thought it would have been a much better season finale than the one we got this season. But the main thing of this episode is that Team Arrow uncovers the video that some assassin is the one that killed Owen, and he was hired by Ricardo Diaz, which they don't know yet. We know it by the end of the episode, but they do not. But then they show the video to Caden James, which, by the way, there was a surprise Flash crossover there, which I thought was really cool. Like, usually you could think that they could just call Flash for help with this thing, but obviously Flash has to deal with his own thing with the Thinker. But just to call Flash to run you over to the other side of the city, that was a cool short crossover that I did not expect to see. The synopsis told us that Caden James is going to find something out about the Green Arrow, and I thought that that's probably going to be that he wasn't the one who killed Owen Post, which I was right about. I was also right about a couple things. I was right about basically everything I predicted for this episode in my trailer breakdown, because I said that Ricardo Diaz is going to take over from Caden James in this episode, and also that the Civil War will be set up in this episode, because you see in the next episode in the trailer that, yeah, it's the Civil War episode, which I will talk about more in my trailer breakdown. But everything I talked about in my trailer breakdown for this episode, I was right about, which is pretty cool. But this episode, the whole conflict with Caden James telling Team Arrow to round up all the people in his organization, meeting Ricardo Diaz, Laurel, meeting Black Siren, and also Anatoly. I thought that was pretty cool and done really well. Mostly everything in this episode was really good, which is why it's one of my favorite episodes of the season. I feel like for every Arrow review, I have to talk about the fight scenes, because that is a big part of the show, the fight scenes. That's one of the best things about the show, the fact that the fight scenes are so good, save for Season 4. And, yeah, just Season 4. Every other season had really great fight scenes. So I have to talk about the fight scenes in this episode. The fight scenes, especially the ones with Black Canary, were really, really great. Everyone else didn't really have that many fight scenes. Green Arrow, I don't think, had any, and then Diggle had one with Ricardo Diaz, and also Wild Dog and Mr. Terrific had one with Ricardo Diaz. But both of those fight scenes were really short and not that great, and it made Ricardo Diaz look pretty unthreatening, because he lost to Mr. Terrific and Wild Dog, even though he probably shouldn't if he wants to be the main villain of the season, and if he wants to live up to the one of the best fighters in the world in the DC Universe title that he has in the comics. But like everything else, the Black Canary fight scenes were really great in this episode. The fight scenes where she was fighting Black Siren were great, and that whole storyline I felt was really done really well. Even like I expected the last episode, I expected to feel like Black Siren has no chance for a redemption, but this episode kind of proved otherwise, and I felt like Black Siren probably does. And there's no Black Canary on the team right now, so there is room for her. if the team never gets back together, which it probably should. It probably will, I mean. But I think Black Siren, after watching this episode, probably does have a chance for a redemption arc, and Quentin is the one to see it through. But back to the fight scenes. The Black Canary fight scenes specifically were the best ones in this episode. The ones where she fought Black Siren and the ones where she fought those goons trying to get to Black Siren were really great, and she definitely had the best fight scenes in this episode. One last thing to touch on is William in this episode. He was acting really weird, and it feels like they forced him into the climax of the episode, and that was the only way they could think of to get for Kate and James to not blow up the city is by William being there. It was just really forced and weird how he was there. It didn't make any sense, and just Kate and William was acting really, really weird in this episode, like unnaturally weird. Like, it didn't make any sense. The fact that he went to that place at the end of the episode, near the end of the episode, didn't add up at all, considering there wasn't literally no point saying that, I feel safe around the Green Arrow. It didn't make any sense, and that was like my biggest problem with this episode, other than everything I said in the review already. It was just the William thing, it felt forced and didn't really need to be there at all. In conclusion, this is definitely one of, I don't know if it's my favorite, because I really liked the Deathstroke episodes and also episode 2, but it is one of my favorite episodes of the season. We had the reveal that Ricardo Diaz was behind everything, which I thought was done mostly really well, although they didn't really need to hide it the whole episode, but it was pretty satisfying in the end, and the fact that he is the main villain now is pretty cool. Hopefully he is a good main villain. And then just the whole episode, the fight scenes were great. Team Arrow rounding up Anatoly Diaz and Laurel was done really well. The flashbacks, even though they should have happened earlier in the season, were actually really good and heartwarming and emotional, because it's the flashbacks where Kate and James find out that his son is dead. Almost everything in this episode was done really well, which is why I'll give the episode a 9.6 out of 10. But anyway, let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below and in the poll in the top right corner of the video. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.